But there's a $200, for $17,000 a month. But there's a $200 lifetime maximum use.
Oh yeah, I know.
Folks, please.
You're saying that the Wi-Fi only reaches to here now?
Well, I don't know, but I know it reaches here. I don't know if it reaches
Do
there.
the chairs here? Do you want to...
Yeah, turn the chairs around, or around the table, or however you want it.
Yes.
Jeremy and I can share one.
Oh, thank you very much. I didn't even know I was supposed to bring something. My week has been.
All right, please, people, folks, please. I'd really like to start.
Let me put my book back away. What?
Here. Sit there and I'll get one more. Oh, here's one. Yep.
There.
All right, we're going to start.
Close.
What? Yeah, I do. All right, so for those of you who I knew were going to be in the class, I sent you a link to the text for tonight. I know some of you might not have received it or might not have printed it, so I did print a few extras. So if anybody does not have the text for tonight, anybody else? All right, there's a couple here.
Do we need to see?
No, not tonight. Not tonight. You will in the future. So, for those of you who are off in cyberspace, we're just setting up another table.
That's me. I'm on cyberspace.
No, we have other people participate.
Except for I can't hear you.
And by the questions that you want to ask, you have to do two things. First of all, you'll have to unmute your microphone and get my attention somehow. But you can all hear me. Can you hear me? Give a thumbs up.
Not really.
What? Okay, great.
He's connecting to people
Great.
outside.
Yes. Okay. Yes. Yes. For those of you who are yes, this class is available both in person and via Zoom. Okay, and which is a video classroom. And the other thing that's pretty cool about Zoom is that it automatically records it. So even if we happen to have a class that there's nobody out there in cyberspace doing the class, I'm still going to use Zoom because I'm still going to record it, okay? So because I know for a couple people said, well, I want to do the class, but I can't make it then, or I'll be able to make it, but not tonight or whatever. So it's all going to be recorded, and I'll put it up on YouTube, and so anybody we can make it go viral. That was supposed to be funny. I'm sorry. All right. So, just a couple things about like how we're going to proceed. Tonight's class is really just sort of introductory, like an overview of theory and how we're going to proceed. Once we finish this, we will be looking at the Siddur. Okay, so if you want to bring your own Siddur, that's great. I mean, if not, we certainly have lots of Siddurim in the room. And I don't really care whether which, I mean, obviously it needs to be sort of a standard, so a conservative or Orthodox Siddur, not Reform or Reconstructionist, only because, although when we get later on, we may look at the Reform and Reconstructionist Siddurim as well, so that what you'll see is that there is a certain structure. And even the Reform Siddur, which may at first strike you, if you're not used to it, as really, really different, it still follows the same structure. Okay. And so what we're going to really do is look at the structure of the Siddur, so we understand how it all kind of fits together. Okay, both in terms, so just, I mean, I'm assuming certain things, and maybe I shouldn't even assume that. Everybody knows what a Siddur is, right? A Siddur is, it's a prayer book, okay? And the word Siddur comes from so Hebrew, for those of you who don't know, the way the Hebrew language works, it's almost like a language that was invented by a computer, okay? You have 3-letter roots that convey the meaning, and then how they are conjugated conveys like the part of speech, whether it's a noun or a verb, whether it's future, past, present, etc. Okay, so the root for Siddur is Samech Daled Resh, Seder. And are other words that you know of that have that same root? Seder, right? The Passover Seder. So the root, the Hebrew word for root is shoresh. Okay, and I prefer the shoresh Seder conveys and I prefer where does this all convey a both idea that we're doing a structure? Conveys there. Okay. Okay, that's not here. Okay. Well, 2 weeks from now is where the real validation. If you're right, you didn't know what was going to happen tonight. 2 weeks from now, if you're still here, that's the real validation. Okay, so where does this all come from? Okay, and so there's a couple things I want to say about that. Is that, one of the things, I mean, for example, has anybody been to a synagogue of like a different, like most of us are Ashkenazi, right? Our ancestors come from Europe, mostly the Eastern Europe, actually war is slightly what we have. Okay, but if you go to a Sephardic synagogue, very different. If you go to a Hasidic synagogue, very different. If you go to an Italian synagogue, very different. Okay, but it's really unity within diversity, because if you know what to look for, you see that the structure is the same, right? It's just that the wording of certain prayers may be slightly different or even radically different. But even if the wording is different, the theme and what it conveys is going to be the same, okay? Because that was fixed by the Mishnah, okay? Now, the Mishnah was codified, meaning it was written down in its final form about 1,800 years ago, okay? But it preserves traditions that are older, but it was written down in its final form 1,800 years ago, okay? And the order of the Mishnah that has the laws of prayers is called brachot, Mishnah brachot. brachot. Right? So the Mishnah has 6 different orders. When I said order, brachot, that's wrong. The tractate. Okay, within each order there are several tractates. The brachot is in the seder, in the order seder, zra'im, seed, agricultural laws. Brachot is under agricultural laws. Why?
You say prayers over the crops.
Right. I mean, though most of us know that, right? That if you eat this kind of fruit, right? If you eat an apple, Borei pri ha'etz, right? If you eat a potato, Borei pri ha'adama, right? Borei pri ha'etz, fruit of the tree. Pri ha'adama, fruit of the ground, fruit of the earth, right? Grape, wine, pri hagafen, fruit of the vine. Okay, so that's all of that is codified in the Mishnah. Okay, so but we're going to look at the first 4 Mishnahs. It's interesting. The whole thing is called a Mishnah, and then each paragraph is also called a Mishnah, right? So this is Order Zra'im, Tractate Brachot, Mishnah 1:1. Okay. From when may one recite Shema in the evening? From the time when the Kohanim go in to eat their truma, produce consecrated for priestly consumption, until the end, says Rabbi Eliezer. All right, I'm going to stop there. Okay, so what's the question that they're asking here? What's the question that they're asking?
When do you say Shema?
Right. What's the earliest time?
What's the earliest you can say it during when I guess the sun goes down?
Right,
For the
but
night.
I'm not even interested in the answer. I'm just interested in the question.
Right.
Okay. What's the earliest time that you can recite Shema? Now, this is the very, very first thing in Mishnah Brachot. Do you notice anything? Is there anything odd about that question? I mean, they're just jumping right in. What's the earliest time you can say Shema? Shouldn't there be something before that?
Morning prayer instead of evening.
No, evening
Well,
is the beginning of the
evening is the beginning of the day.
Yeah,
Yeah,
evening is the beginning of the day.
All right, what's the assumption here?
That you know the Shema.
Not that you know it,
Do it.
that you should do it.
Yeah.
Right? Exactly. There is no attempt to demonstrate that we have to say the Shema. None whatsoever. It's just assumed that you know that's assumed to be a fact. It's not saying, how do we know we have to say the Shema? Right? We know we have to say the Shema. What we're asking is, what's the earliest time to say it? Okay? It's assumed. Now, here's my question. The Mishnah assumes that we have to say the Shema. Why do we have to say the Shema?
Why?
What?
Because the Mishnah gives us the time to say it.
Okay.
Biblical
where does the
commandment, it says inside the first paragraph after the Shema that you say it when you lie down and when you get up.
Exactly, right? It's self-referential. How do we know we have to say the Shema? Because the Shema tells us we have to say the Shema, right? It's circular, it's self-referential. And by the way, when we say the Shema, it's not just the line Shema Yisrael, it's the whole three paragraphs.
The whole thing.
Okay, the whole thing. But yes, the Shema tells us to say the Shema, right? And now, why are we looking at the evening Shema first?
Beginning of the day.
Beginning of the day, but not only that. What does the Shema say?
When we lie down.
When you lie down and when you rise up, right? Lie down first, right? So that's what we're discussing first, right? The whole thing is like internal to the thing itself, right? So when you lie down. So the answer, now there's 3 different answers. I'm not interested. This is not a class in practical halakha, okay? I'm not interested so much in the answer right now as I am in the question. Okay, so Rabbi Eliezer says the earliest time is when the Kohanim go in to eat their truma. Truma is consecrated food that only the Kohanim can eat. Okay, the Kohanim actually and their wives, right? And their unmarried daughters, right? We've taught, some of us, we've studied this before, right? Now, okay, what do you think about that answer?
It could vary for, they would have to agree on a certain time.
Well,
so
all right, it
so
could-
there's consistency.
it
Why are
could-
those two things like correlated with one another? Like, what do they have to do with one another?
Right, what do they have to do with one another? You're correct that the times could vary, but the times could vary anyway, because this is all according to,
Different places, yeah.
well, different places, but it's also according to sunrise and sunset,
Right,
right?
yeah. Right.
I mean,
Mhm.
so
I was
go
going to
ahead.
say, isn't, for instance, you light candles according to a specific time of night in the sky.
Correct.
So wouldn't that be almost the same kind of thing you would have to do? You'd have to look in the night sky.
Exactly. So the Kohanim are trying to figure out when they can eat, right, based on the position
Of the
of
stars.
the stars in the
Yeah.
sky, right?
Right.
Okay, but Jeremy, you said something about connecting the two things, right? Now, question. Mishnah is codified when? I already said
So
that.
1800 years ago.
1800 years ago. So roughly 200 of the Common Era. Okay. Temple is destroyed when?
70 AD.
70 of the Common Era. Right? So the thing that Rabbi Eliezer tells you is your sign that you're allowed to say the Shema.
The temple is gone.
The temple is gone. They haven't been doing that for 130
Yeah.
years. Right? They haven't been doing that for 130 years, right? It's like saying, a comparable answer for us would be at the time that President Lincoln brings his top hat to be steamed. Right? Right?
That's before the play.
Right? Right. But it's not exactly relevant. My answer, I don't know that it's the correct answer or the Mishnah's answer or anybody else's answer, but why are they connecting this to something that hasn't been happening for 130 years? Why?
Continuity.
Continuity. Yes, say more, please.
To have the, sorry, I got laryngitis.
Yeah.
To connect the temple,
Yes. Yeah.
like to make them realize the connection all the way back.
Exactly, that there's continuity between prayer and temple, right? Because we don't have the temple anymore, right? We don't have the temple anymore, but instead of the temple, we have prayer, right? So this is not something, right? The rabbis think that this is not something that they made up, right? This is something that is continuity with what was going on before. Continuous with, but not identical to, because temple's destroyed, right? And I'm going to say this, okay? And I digress a lot when I'm teaching, okay? But one of the key debates between Judaism and Christianity, remember, Christianity is just starting to take off at this time, 200 CE, right? That's the patristic period and so on and so forth. So the temple is destroyed. The temple is destroyed. How do you gain atonement in a world without the temple, right? The Christian answer is Jesus. The rabbi's answer is Al HaTorah, Va'al HaAvodah, Va'al Gimilut Chasadim, right? Torah study, prayer, and acts of love. If the temple's destroyed, right? There are essentially two choices that the leaders of the era have: go out of business, right? No temple, no Judaism, or figure out something else. And then assert that there is a continuity between what was going on before, right? So, and we see this in a lot of ways, all right? We see it very explicitly here in other words, in connecting our schedule of prayer to the schedule of the Kohanim in the temple, right? We see it also, right? So most of you come to shul, sometimes some more than others, right? Certain days we have Musaf, right? Certain days we have Musaf, certain days we don't have Musaf. Okay, let me tell you a little story about Musaf, because I grew up Reform, okay? In Reform, there's no such thing as Musaf, okay? My freshman year of college, I go to services at the Hillel. There's only conservative services, right? Very unfamiliar. They seem interminable, right? And then we get to the point where, like, if you're Reform, it's over, okay? And the machzor that we're using is this. Remember the old Silverman machzor? Yes. It doesn't say Musaf. It says additional service.
Right.
Additional service? What do we need an additional service for, right? I mean, we've been here long enough, right? Which is why most people leave. Right? But Musaf does mean additional. Okay. How do you know what days we have Musaf? I mean, obviously the easy answer is it says so in the Siddur, right? But what determines whether a particular day has Musaf or not?
But the day that was sacrifices occurred in the temple.
Extra sacrifice.
Yeah.
Right. Musaf is the name of a sacrifice. Okay, an additional sacrifice. On days when there was a Musaf sacrifice, we have a Musaf Amida. Okay, another continuity between the temple and what we do now. Okay, so let me introduce you. Some of you have heard me mention this before, but it's called the theory of the chain novel. Okay, and the person who developed this theory was a man named Robert Cover, who was a professor at Harvard Law School, who died very young, died still in his 40s. And he wrote both about American law and Jewish law. And he said that the way both Jewish law and American law should work is the theory of a chain novel. In other words, let's assume we as a group are going to write a novel. Okay, I write chapter 1. I then give over chapter 1 to Marcia. She writes chapter 2, right? Marcia then gives chapter 1 and 2 to Jeremy, right? By the time we get to Marilyn, the characters that I invented in chapter 1 may bear not a heck of a lot of a resemblance to the characters that Marilyn is, even though they have the same name, right? But if you go back and you see the continuity from Marilyn to Margie, right? And from Margie to et cetera, right? Backwards, right? You work backwards, right? And so there may not be a heck of a lot of similarity between what we do and what Moses did, right? But if you go, from us to what our parents did, pretty close. Parents to grandparents, all the way back, right? And that's what's going on here, right? That's what's going on here. It's not exactly the same thing, but there's continuity, and you may not really be able even to see the continuity between step 1 and step 20. But you can see the continuity between step 20 and step 19, 19 and 18, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so that's the theory of the chain novel. Okay, so now we've looked at the evening Shema. Okay. Now, second Mishnah. From when may one recite Shema in the morning? Makes sense, right? Because when you lie down, when you rise up, right? So now because we're Jews, so we need to define these things, right? So from what's the earliest time to recite Shema in the morning? From when one can distinguish between techelet, the purple blue wool, and white. Okay, right? So if you remember, they don't have artificial lighting, right? If there's enough light,
Right.
you can distinguish between techelet and white. It's light enough to say the Shema. Okay, now, question. Why is that a good metric? Why is that a good metric?
Because the light is a reflection of time.
Okay, but it's more than that.
Originally, there was techelet on the zitzit.
Right. You had techelet on your seat, right? If you're going to pray,
Look at your
you've got your dawnometer right there. Right? You've got your dawnometer right there. Oh, yep, I can distinguish between the two of them. It's early enough. It's early enough to pray. Right? Now, I'm not going to look at the whole thing, but Rabbi Yeshua says until 3 hours of the day. Okay, what that means quickly, because I know like we're never going to finish this. You take the amount of daylight and divide that into 12. Okay, so that's called a sha'az manit, or a halachic hour. Okay, so right now, our halachic hours are there's still more daylight than darkness, right? So our halachic hours are still a little bit more than 60 minutes, but they're getting shorter and shorter and shorter, right? Until we get to the, right? So the third hour, meaning 1/4 of the way between dawn and dusk, is the third hour, and that's Rabbi Yeshua says that's the latest time. That's pretty late, right? That's pretty late. Why does Rabbi Yeshua say the third hour? For such is the way of the sons of kings to arise at the third hour. Okay. So what? So what? So what? What does that have to do with us?
I'm just reading what it says.
Okay. In other words, let me make it more colloquial. Princes are allowed to sleep in. Right? Princes are allowed to sleep in, so the latest time for Shema is the time that princes are accustomed to getting out of bed. So what?
Right. So what?
So what? So answer my question. So what? What does this say? Every Jew is a prince. Why? Why is every Jew a prince? Who is every Jew's father? The king. Right? Right? Every Jew is a prince because every Jew's father is the king. Right? Now, I have to say, I taught this material many years ago. As you know, I spent a year at a Trappist monastery, and I was teaching the scholastics, meaning monks who were training to be ordained as priests, and we studied this material. Okay, and you should know that since Vatican II, the first service in a Trappist monastery is at 3:30 in the morning. Okay, it used to be at 2 in the morning, but now life is easy. Okay. And they said, we need to go show this Mishnah to the abbot. Abbot was not impressed. Okay.
A real prince.
Yeah.
Real prince.
Okay. But I just thought it was worth looking at because it's an interesting statement, right? If your father is the king, right, then that makes you a prince, right? That makes you a prince.
What about princesses?
But princesses are not obligated to recite the
It's
Shema,
not, right. Women are not
right?
obligated, they're not
Princesses are not obligated to recite the Shema. Okay, I didn't bring that. Okay, because it's not necessary. It's not really relevant to the structure of the Siddur, but we can look at it at some point. Okay, but yes, you're a princess, but princesses are not obligated to recite the Shema.
And they wouldn't see the purple blue wool because they don't have the tallit.
Right? They don't wear tzitzit.
Right.
Exactly. Right. Exactly. Right. Because all right, the general rule is that women are exempt from
Bless you.
bless you. Mitzvat aseh shehazman garma. Okay, positive commandments which are time bound. Right? In other words, a positive commandment is a thou shalt, right? And if it's a thou shalt that has to be done at a specific time, women are exempt. Right? And prayer is a thou shalt which has to be done at a specific time. And tzitzit is a thou shalt which has to be done at a specific time, right? Now, there are certain exceptions like lighting Shabbat candles, right, which is a thou shalt that has to be done at a specific time, right? But in general, it's only the thou shalts. It's not the thou shalt nots, right? So you're not allowed to say, oh, I'm a woman, I'm allowed to eat a cheeseburger. No. You could if it's a Beyond Burger. Those are good, by the way. But the thou shalts that have to be done at a specific time in classic halakha, women are exempt from. Okay, good or bad? Why? Not going to go there. Okay, and obviously we as conservative Jews don't follow that anymore, right? But anyway, the school of Shammai says in the evening all people should recline and recite. And in the morning they should stand, since it says, when you lie down and when you rise up. In other words, Shammai says, at night, when you say the Shema, you should lie down, because it says, when you lie down. And in the morning, you should be standing, because it says, when you rise up. Right now, we know, most of you know enough to know that if Shammai says it, we generally don't follow it, right? But the school of Hillel says each person may recite it in his usual way, since it says, and when you walk on the road, right? When, right, as I learned it, when thou liest down, when thou risest up, when thou walkest by the way, right? So nobody thinks, oh, that you should say the Shema while, going for a stroll around the shul, right? So it clearly doesn't mean, it's talking about time. It's not talking about posture, right? If so, why does it say when you lie down and when thou liest down and when thou risest up? It means at the time when people do that, right? Which is, of course, what we do. Now this is cool. Rabbi Tarfon said, I was once traveling on the road and I reclined to recite Shema in accordance with the view of the school of Hillel, right? So school of Shammai, rather. Shammai says you lie down to recite the Shema. So I lied down to recite the Shema, and I was attacked by bandits, right? And the other sages said to him, good. You deserved it, right? They didn't say, oh, how terrible, we feel your pain, right? No, they did not feel his pain. They said, good, you deserved it because you went against the view of Hillel, right? And that's not what we do. Okay, so don't say the Shema lying down, because you'll get attacked by bandits. And it'll be your own fault. Okay. Now, in the morning, one says two blessings before it and one after it. while in the evening one says 2 blessings before it and 2 after it, a long one and a short one. We studied this, some of us, which was the genesis of this class, okay? This is talking about the structure of the section of the Siddur, and we're going to come back to this. But you're going to see that we do this, right? We still do this, right? We have the Baruch Hu, right? And then we have 2 blessings, and then we have the Shema, and in the morning, 1 after it, in the evening, 2 after it, okay? A long one and a short one. Okay, now, what's a long blessing and what's a short blessing? Okay, it has nothing to do with the length of the blessing. Okay, a long blessing begins with Baruch Atah Adonai and ends with Baruch Atah Adonai. Okay, so like the blessing, I'm trying to think. I mean, if we had a Siddur, we could find them, right? But the first blessing before the Shema at night, Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher b'dvaro ma'ariv aravim, right? Blessed are you, O Lord our God, who with his word causes the evening to fall. And then it ends, Baruch Atah Adonai hamariv aravim, right? Blessed are you, O Lord, who brings on the evening, right? So that's a long blessing. A short blessing doesn't begin with Baruch Atah Adonai. The next blessing is a short blessing. Ahavat Olam Beit Yisrael, right? It's wordy, but it's a short blessing because it doesn't begin with Baruch and end with Baruch. It just ends with Baruch, right? And where they said to make the blessing long, he may not shorten it. Where they said to make the blessing short, he may not lengthen it. Where they said to conclude, he is not permitted to omit the conclusion. Where they said not to conclude, he is not permitted to conclude. Means that Baruch Atah at the end. Okay, that's called in Hebrew, it's called a chatima. Okay, in English, it's actually known in technical terms as a eulogy. Okay, because eulogy simply means good word. Okay, the point is, now this, I know that this doesn't make a lot of sense, and it'll make more sense once we start looking at the Siddur, but the sages are talking about the structure of the prayers and the themes of the prayers, not 100% the content of the prayers. Okay, and part of that is because, I mean, what do we have that they didn't have? Printing, right? So it's hard. In other words, this didn't become standardized. They just sort of gave you an outline and a structure, right? And the job of the Chazan, right, wasn't just to sing the liturgy. It was to make up the words of the prayers as we go along, right? The Chazan has the structure, has the themes, has the Baruch Atah for the beginning, the Baruch Atah for the end, but not everything that's in the middle, right? So it's kind of like improvisational prayer, right? Improvisational prayer, okay? And that's why you'll see, if you study the Mishnah Brachot, you'll see if the Chazan says this, such and such a thing, we replace them immediately, okay? Because it might show that either that they didn't know what they were doing or that they were heretics, right? So, what?
That's how you try out as a Zon, make sure that they...
Yeah, okay. So that's the beginning of Mishnah Brachot. Are there any questions so far? Yes.
I just have a question. So there were synagogues at the time of the temple.
There were.
Was any of this structure being done at that time, or did we receive any of that from that time?
Have to assume that the answer to that is yes. Okay. I mean, we know that there were synagogues. Some of the sages quoted in the Mishnah were alive while the temple stood. Hillel and Shammai were alive when the temple stood. Okay, so if Hillel and Shammai are debating the liturgy, right, then the liturgy is around when the temple's around. Absolutely. Now, having said that, I would make the following heretical observation. Okay. Just because the Mishnah says in the temple they did X does not necessarily mean that in the temple they actually did X. Okay. And there's, not necessarily any other way of knowing it because there's not a lot of contemporaneous eyewitness accounts of the temple, right? I mean, Josephus, right? Josephus, because he was around while the temple stood. Okay, the earliest Gospels, right? I mean, this is again this interchange between Judaism and Christianity, right? Like if you asked the writers of the Gospels, say, what religion are you? What would they have said? Jewish, right? And at least the earliest Gospels, the temple was still standing, right? So there's some eyewitnesses to what happened in the temple. The Mishnah is not an eyewitness, right? The Mishnah is 130 years later. Okay, but for sure, I mean, I think we can say that the Mishnah reflects earlier material that was handed down orally and just not written down. Okay, but it's impossible for us to know like precisely what happened, right? But for sure we know that there were synagogues, right? Even while the temple stood. There's a synagogue at Masada, right? And that was when the temple still stood, right? There's this, I mean, many of you have seen that synagogue. You might have seen the synagogue in Capernaum, right? Which is built on the ruins of an older synagogue, right? But the synagogue where Jesus went and read the Torah, right? So we know that there were synagogues, okay? Absolutely. Any other questions? Okay, great. So, right. So the sort of like overarching point that I want to make at this point is that the liturgy has a structure. Okay, and then within that structure, there are certain variations. Okay, there are like different units of the liturgy, right? For example, like one of the units of the liturgy, which is what Mishnah 1:4 is about, is called Shema Uvirchoteha, the Shema and its blessings. Okay, and you will find that in every morning service and every evening service, there's Shema Uvirchoteha, the Shema and its blessings, right? And you will find that the themes and the structure of that section, right? There's a structure for the evening and there's a structure for the morning, right? And even if the words might be somewhat different on Shabbat versus weekdays, the structure and theme is the same. Just the wording is different, right? If you go to a Sephardic synagogue, the structure and theme is the same. The wording might be radically different, but the structure and theme is the same, okay? So that's one section of the liturgy. The sort of technical term for that is a rubric, okay? And one of the things, for example, that I noticed when I started becoming more traditional, more observant, there's a lot of Kaddises, right? There's a lot of Kaddises. What are those Kaddises doing? They're marking the transition from one rubric to another rubric, okay? So it's telling you, like the Hatzi Kaddish before Amida is saying, like if you drive, if you take Route 30 all the way into Pennsylvania, right? There'll be a sign that says leaving Maryland, entering Pennsylvania, right? That's a Kaddish, right? So your Hatzi Kaddish is saying, leaving Shema Uvirchotehawil, entering Amida land. Okay, that's what these Kaddishes do. Okay, which is how we came to have the mourners Kaddish, because that's also a transition, right? Leaving the land of the living, entering the land of the no longer living, right? So but a Kaddish marks a transition. Okay, so we have the structure and the themes of the Siddur, 2nd century, right? Probably earlier than that, but for sure no later than the 2nd century. So when do you think our earliest Siddur is? Like the oldest Siddur that we have a copy of the entire intact Siddur? 875. Right, the Siddur of Rav Amram Gaon, 875. So now, so some people say, because people, if they don't know, they say, "Oh, I went, and how come it's so different?" It's not surprising that it's different. It's surprising that it's not more different, right? I mean, you have these people spread all over the world without printing, right? Let alone, the internet, right? And for 675 years, right, things have been developed. And yet the structure of Siddur Rav Amram Gaon is the structure that the Mishnah gives. Right, 675 years later, even though the Mishnah is written in Eretz Yisrael, right? The Gemara, the commentary on the Mishnah, is written in Babylonia, and Rav Amram Gaon is actually in Babylonia, but he's sending this to the Jews of Spain, who send him a question. We don't know how to pray, so he writes this whole Siddur for them to show them what they're supposed to do, right? So it's really remarkable that they're not more different when you think about it, right? I mean, especially because, look, I mean, it may not be so remarkable that, the Torah is like intact, right? Because people said this is the word of God, right? We can't change it. We have to be very, very careful to copy it accurately, right? Nobody believes that the Siddur is the word of God, right? I mean, even rabbis from Chabad or Eish Torah don't believe that the Siddur is the word of God, right? It was written by human beings. Right, so there is more latitude to change it, and yet, it maintains the same structure, okay, and that's really the remarkable thing, right? So there's sort of different families, right? The main sort of families are the Ashkenazi and the Sephardi, right? But within, there's all different ones, and for example, I mean, if you look at an old German prayer book, it'll tell you, the Siddur according to the tradition of Frankfurt am Main, the Siddur according to the tradition of other places, right? Of Berlin. Wherever, right? Each town had its own tradition. Not massive, but certain variations. The same for the Jews of Italy, okay? And by the way, the Jews of Italy, are they Sephardic or Ashkenazic?
Sephardic.
You say Sephardic.
I was at services there for 2 years. So Sephardic.
Okay, anybody else?
Well, I know I was there when you
Southern-
said it was
yeah,
it was
Italy,
it was
Sephardic.
Ashkenazi.
No,
Not-
they're neither.
They're neither.
They're neither Sephardic nor
Oh, wait, wait, wait,
Ashkenazic
so
because
what-
well, I mean, there may be if they're more recent immigrants, but the Jews of Italy who have been there since forever predate the split between Sephardic and
They
Ashkenazic.
were definitely more Sephardic than they were Ashkenazi.
Okay, but they may be from other places. Okay, their liturgy resembles the Sephardic more than the Ashkenazic, but it's actually neither. Okay, and having said that, there's the liturgy of Venice and the liturgy of Rome
Right.
and the liturgy of Florence, and each of them is a little bit different. So I have a friend.
Well, we were near Pisa,
Okay.
Livorno, and
Okay.
that's where we were. We went to the Livorno synagogue.
Okay. Right.
That's where we were.
Right. And for sure they would have, and they actually even had a seminary in Livorno. It was like a major Jewish community. They had a rabbinical
That's where we
school.
went. That's
Yeah.
where we went services.
But I have a friend who lives in Israel, and he's from Jerusalem, and so he goes to the Italian synagogue in Jerusalem. And I went there one Shabbat with him, and it was fascinating, But first of all, he explained to me. He said, we're from Italy, but we're from all over Italy, so we had to come up with a sort of compromise Siddur that has a little bit from each of the different traditions. And then he says to me after service, he says, the man who leads Shaharit is the chief rabbi of Padua. And I said, the chief rabbi of Padua. No doubt in the same sense as I am the chief conservative rabbi of York, Pennsylvania. Right? Which,
Montgomery Village.
right. I am now the
Village.
chief conservative rabbi of
Montgomery
Montgomery.
Village.
Actually, the chief
Right.
rabbi of Montgomery.
That's right. You got it.
Right. But yes, so he was the chief rabbi of Padua. Okay, so I want to talk. We got 8 minutes left. About a couple of other different things that will help you understand what we're trying to do. Okay, one I'm going to call the taxonomy of prayer. Okay, by which I mean that people who are scholars of liturgy will take any prayer and put it into one of three categories. All right, prayers of petition, prayers of praise, or prayers of thanksgiving. Right? Prayer petition is what? Somebody make up a prayer petition.
Asking.
Make up a prayer of petition.
Lord, give me food.
Lord, give me food. Right?
Make it rain.
Lord, make it rain. Right? Right? Or
Pay
like
the
we.
mortgage of Pilat Shalom.
Right. Right. Or as we say in Avinu Malkeinu that some of us said with extra fervor this year, Lord, Avinu Malkeinu, rid us of tyrants. Right? Right. That's a prayer of petition where we're asking God for something.
Yes.
Okay. Praise. Right. Oh God, you're amazing. Right.
Oh my God.
Really nice work, God, right? Thanksgiving, right? Now, sometimes, I mean, when you look at it, and kids really pick up on this a lot, they say, well, praise and thanksgiving are kind of the same thing, right? And I would say sometimes it's not easy really to slot a particular prayer, say whether it's praise or thanksgiving, right? I mean, mostly you could say it's thanksgiving if it has the word thanks. Right? If it doesn't have the word thanks, then it's more like praise. But they are very, very, very similar. Okay. So that's one sort of taxonomy of types of prayer, of which there are three: petition, praise, and thanksgiving. Another taxonomy of types of prayer is really two: fixed prayer versus spontaneous prayer. Right? Fixed prayer meaning what? What?
Set time.
Set time. What else?
Zorka Tadonai, a prayer like a hamotzi.
Right.
Fixed
It's It's in the book, right? It's fixed.
It's fixed.
It's
right.
fixed,
Mostly-
right?
Yeah.
Whereas spontaneous prayer is not fixed, right? In other words, if you get into a car accident, right?
Right.
You say, thank God I wasn't killed,
Right.
right?
Absolutely.
That's a spontaneous prayer.
Right.
You come to shul the next Shabbos and you bench Gomel because you were in a car accident and wasn't killed. That's fixed prayer, right? And everybody who prays has both, right? Everybody who prays has both. In fact, people who think they don't pray. Pray, right? Like that old, I've seen it on bumper stickers, right? As long as there are math tests, there will be prayer in schools. Right? Right? No, we're not telling people they can't pray, right? Right? As long as there are math tests, there will be prayer in schools, but it will be spontaneous prayer, not fixed prayer, right? Now, and they are just different, right? They are just different. Okay. And finally, I want to look at the language of prayer, right? By which I mean, why do we pray in Hebrew rather than in English?
Continuity.
Continuity. Okay. Any other reasons?
I pray in English.
You pray in English. Okay.
I pray in English.
Fixed or spontaneous? Or both?
Depending.
Okay. I mean, I would say that for most of us, right, when we are doing spontaneous prayer, we tend to do it in the language with which we are most familiar, right? And so, yes, if I am, thank God I wasn't killed, right? Or, whatever it is, it's going to be in English, right? But to me, the thought of like coming to shul and picking up a Siddur and saying those words in English, right? That to me,
I do both.
All right.
When I come to shul, I do both.
Okay. Yeah.
Since I don't know a word of what Hebrew's saying, I get the spiritual feeling from singing it because I love Hebrew. So it's all spontaneous because when I read the English, I get nothing out of it. It seems all the same and blah. So I somehow
Right.
get the feeling from the Hebrew and do it spontaneous. It's just
Right. So I think there are all
I do
kinds.
mix.
Right. I think there are all kinds of reasons, right? And there's no, I mean, the point is, I can teach you, what tune to say, right? Because people are not always sensitive, right? But there is a difference between weekday tunes and Shabbat tunes and high holiday tunes
Absolutely.
and Yontif tunes, right? There's a difference. And again, most of you come to shul frequently enough that you actually know that, and you could, right? But if you hear bum 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 bum, that's the high holidays, right? Right. Da 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 da. That's weekday, right? I mean, we know, even if you don't know that you know it, you know it, you recognize it, right? So I can teach you the tunes and I can teach you the words and I can teach you to stand or sit, right? But I can't teach you the feelings, right? Nor can I say, oh, your feelings are invalid, right? Your feelings are wrong, right? I mean, I can't. And one lesson that I've learned, right, is that, both as a rabbi and as a husband, is that saying to somebody, don't feel that way, never gets them to not feel that way. Right?
Feelings are.
Right? Feelings simply are.
So the tune's supposed to make you feel different. So that's why we have different tunes. Like if you say the wrong tune at the wrong time, I mean, is there like when I used to teach Tot Shabbat, I didn't come all the time, so I used the one I knew. Now, does that make it? I was using whatever tune I knew, which should probably
look. All right, so
maybe a Saturday tune.
So this is right, this is a legitimate question, right? I mean, because in, I mean, and there's a legitimate debate, right? Should we go with what people know, or should we go with what is technically proper, right? And I don't know what's the right answer. I mean, I think that as an educator, you have to decide that, you know, what's going to work. First of all, if I'm not capable of doing it technically correctly, then I'm not capable of doing it technically correctly, right?
That's step one. Step two is maybe if they're two, the one that's most familiar, or three or four is the one
Right.
they always hear. So to change it on them isn't going to be
Right.
worthwhile either.
I mean, you know, the halachic answer should be
Correct.
their kid. No,
Oh, no.
their kids,
Okay.
right? I mean,
But I should be.
right.
better
I mean,
as
but
an adult teaching.
but you know, we don't. I mean, the halacha informs our decision making, but it doesn't necessarily dictate 100% our decision making, right? I mean, a strictly halachic answer would be their kids. It doesn't matter, right? Because they're not obligated to pray.
But I should know the
But
correct
you-
one.
but
That I'm
we
not
wanna
singing
t-
the wrong one just 'cause I
Right. We
don't
want
know
to
the other
teach
one.
them. We want to teach them correctly.
Okay.
In
Right.
a class about 30 years ago, the rabbi said it's like everybody knows what creeping kosher it is. The rabbi says, "Oh, you don't keep kosher at all?" I'll tell you what, just at least put 10 minutes between meat and dairy, and then work on prayer.
Right.
He said, you know, the prayer is the same thing. Like I often come in and everybody reads the Shema in Hebrew. Don't even look at the book. But then if you're saying want the meaning, but you haven't picked up the words, you read those paragraphs because you're trying to get the meaning. But if you keep coming every week and you learn a word here, a word here, a word here, he said, sooner or later, it'll be that first sentence, just the first sentence will be like, oh, I kind of understand the meaning of it while it's there. He says, if that never happens, but you've been coming every day for 2 years, says he'll take it rather than the guy who knows
Right.
every single Hebrew word
That's probably-
comes once a year.
Okay.
Yeah. So, you know, but
The tunes should matter.
right, it should matter, but you know, half a loaf is better than none, right? You know, for me, look, I mean, it's interesting because I really knew Hebrew
Right,
fairly
you said, so
well
you can't relate.
before I started
Do it
praying
backwards,
regularly.
right.
I mean, I grew up Reform. I didn't know
Right.
Hebrew, but you know, in terms of really going to shul regularly and davening regularly,
So you've done
I already
Hebrew
knew
backwards,
Hebrew when I
right.
started doing that. So your experience
Totally backwards.
of you know, totally saying words over and over and over that you don't know the meaning of, I've never had that experience, so I don't know what it's like. I mean, I would say the closest experience I ever had was one time after some horrible event. I don't even remember now which one it was, but the JCRC asked me to represent the Jewish community at the Sikh Gurdwara, and they had a service, and they pray in Punjabi.
Okay.
Okay.
I know what you're saying.
And I don't know Punjabi. It may surprise you to find out that I don't know Punjabi, but I don't.
He said, "You say something."
To Yiddish, I'll shoot.
And it was awesome. It was awesome. I mean, I really loved it. Also, because the way they do it is a kirtan. So, like the Chazan, I guess they don't call him a Chazan, but the Chazan says a line, and then everybody repeats the line, and so on and so forth. And I repeated it. I don't know what I was saying.
Where were you?
The Sikh place of
Oh,
worship in
oh.
Rockville. Okay, I mean, I hope they weren't saying "kill the Jews, kill the Jews," but no, they weren't. I'm sure they
I
weren't.
know it's true. I don't know what you're saying.
Pretty cool, but that's the only time I've ever had an experience like that. So, you know, but to me, I mean, look, for me to say our liturgy in English, I mean, I don't know. To me, I mean, it would sound stilted, and it would sound, and frankly, I don't take our prayers necessarily literally, right? And you know, presumably most of us don't take them necessarily literally, right? So why do we say these words? Because Bubby and Zadie said these words,
So
right?
that's why the Hebrew without knowing makes me still
Right.
feel it's my
Now,
continuity of life.
if your
isn't it?
Bubby and Zadie didn't say the words, but you still, you know, hey, I signed up to this people, and this people have been saying these words for,
You can join in anywhere.
it's the history, right? And so, you know, again, I mean, I think this whole idea which some people really believe, is that we should only say words that we mean, we couldn't pray together, right? I mean, I guarantee you 2, 4, 6, 8, 10,
Yeah, we got to-
right? There's 11 people in this room. I guarantee you we have 11